All right, so I just wanted to put on a tanking workshop because we've all felt the weight of a bad tank before. You know what that feels like. You've been in dungeon groups with them before. You've been in raids with them before, whether that's ads running for the healers or you pulling threat auto attacking. World of Warcraft needs more tanks, and it's not an easy role to do, and people that uh, just step into it without any knowledge are met with struggles, losing aggro to things, um, people getting super pissed off at them. There's a lot of weight on the shoulders of the tank, whether that be in a raid or in a dungeon, and I think that gives a lot of people anxiety about tanking and makes them not want to do it or nervous about doing it because I mean ultimately people are jerks on this game and they're gonna get mad at you for uh, not pulling the number of mobs they want or not pulling in the specific route that, and that's going to happen no matter how good a tank you are, no matter what you do. You can't make everyone happy. But my goal with this tanking workshop is I want people to have confidence in what they're doing and to know the abilities that they need to be doing for their rotation, just so that they can go in and know that regardless of how bad things get or how bad things start, that they're doing everything that they know the right steps to do. Um, I think it's personally, I'm a little biased. I think it's the hardest role to play in Classic WoW. You get out of tanking what you put into it. Uh, did a great job when nobody pulled threat and DPS didn't have to throttle. Uh, you didn't die. Uh, it's also very apparent when you messed up. Uh, many reasons that I've already said. You get out of it what you put into it. My goal is to develop expertise at tanking so that you guys can perform your roles. So, for starters, I know that a lot of people are coming to this with a lot of different knowledge of tanking and knowledge about warriors, and whether that's beginner expertise. Uh, for starters, I just got to work on the fundamentals. And the first thing that I believe is the most fundamental is threat. And for those of you who don't know, basically every ability that you press in combat generates some amount of threat on the mob. Whether that is you casting a bloodthirst, a sunder armor, battle shout, a demoralizing shout, like everything that you do gives threat. Every heal that is put on you that heals your health while you're in combat gives threat. Interesting note about that: if you receive a heal and you're at full health, that doesn't apply threat. If you get a power word shield and you're not in combat, no threat is transferred to the healer. Uh, if you get a power word shield after you're in combat, that does give threat to the healer. There are also other little nuances of this that give threat. One example that I'll use from last night is on Chromagus. I was DPSing on Chromagus, and the tank pulled the lever, accepted the summon, and I made a mistake. I hit Blood Rage when he did that. And if any of you were paying attention last night, when I hit Blood Rage and I'm hiding behind the wall, Chromagus immediately switched from him to target me. The only action that I'd done, an action that generated rage, and generating rage generates threat. So that's one of those things that uh, is a helpful tip to know when you're a tank. And I can demonstrate that in 5 Man Slayer. But uh, any mob that you pull, I hit Blood Rage, and my threat on him is going up. You can see it on my tiny threat right here. I'm not doing anything, but Blood Rage was generating rage. See, now it's stopped. Now that my Blood Rage So, any action that you do in a raid or in a that is in combat will give you some amount of threat. It's not a lot, but that blood rage was enough to make Chromagus switch from the main tank to me. Now there are other things too that factor into that. If you're in defensive stance, you get 10% more threat. So if you're in, I forget what the threat modifier is for Berserker, but you generate less threat in Berserker stance. So if I was in Berserker, I hit Blood Rage, that's going to generate less threat than. Anyone remember what that number was on there? It doesn't. It'll be less threat than if you're in. Typically, when I'm pulling in trash, if whether that be dungeons or even on a boss, you wait till you're in combat with the mob and make sure your power word shield goes on before you're in combat. That'll probably have gone to a higher level area. The second you're in combat, you hit your blood rage, you hit a battle shout. Battle shout's a ton of threat too. It's even more threat depending on how many party members you hit. And actually, if you've followed the Fight Club theory crafting Discord at all for warriors, some people prefer to use Battle Shout over Sunder Armor in their rotation for tanking. It's kind of nuanced, and actually the threat from that is split by however many mobs are pulled. So if you're pulling one mob, then it's great. If you're pulling one mob and you're hitting every member in your party with Battle Shout, then it's great. The range on that is 20 yards, so everyone's got to be pretty close and get a little bit more range with Booming Voice, but typically not worth it. Anyway, getting too far into the details there. Rage is also used for your threat ability. Bloodthirst, Sunder Armor, Revenge. My goal is to try to make this a little bit. Does anyone know what the highest threat ability that a warrior is?
Heroic?
Good guess. You're gonna get mad at me for this, but no, it's taunt. Taunt is the highest threat ability that a warrior.
Free.
What taunt does is it immediately puts you on top of the threat meter and forces the target to attack you. Now I say that because I wanted to make a distinction. Warriors have two other abilities that force a target to attack. The first one is Mocking Blow. I only have rank 1 because I'm bad. Mocking Blow provides a moderate amount of threat and forces the target to attack you. Mocking Blow is not a taunt. It does not put you to the top of the threat. It just forces him to attack you. The other ability that we have that works like a taunt is Challenging Shout. And that works the same way as Mocking Blow. It forces all nearby enemies to attack you for 6. It does not put you on top of the threat meter at all. The only ability that you have that'll put you on top of the threat meter is your OG taunt. As far as abilities go, we can dive into this a little bit more too later, but your highest threat ability that you're going to cast is going to be Bloodthirst is the highest threat ability by a long shot, especially when you're world buffed. And your rotation does change a little bit, whether you're world buffed or not, because you're generating a lot more when you're world buffed. Your offhand hits are hitting for harder, and they're critting more, and in turn, that's more rage, as well as your main hand. But that brings me into our next point. Revenge is a really good ability, especially if you're not world buffed, because it's only 5 rage. It's the highest threat per rage ability that you have. So if you're sword and board and you're rage starved, Revenge you're always going to be hitting it whenever it pops up. Bloodthirst is your highest threat ability, but it costs 30 rate. Revenge, a rank 6 revenge, 439 versus use a rank 5 Sunder. Rank 5 Sunder is 261 rate. Sunder is 17 threat per rage, and a revenge is 87. So it is significant as far as your rotation goes. Your rotation generally, when you're world buff, is going to be hit Bloodthirst. Well, Bloodthirst, Revenge, Sunder. Every single global, you're hitting something, and you're keeping Heroic Strike going. So Heroic Strike is a little harder to calculate that. Heroic Strike rank 9 on this chart says it's 338 rage. That is the amount of rage that is added, or sorry, the amount of threat that's added to each heroic that you have. But that number differs a little bit. Heroic Strike, if you look at the tooltip, it says it causes a high amount of threat. That's why that is the way that it is, and it's so much threat. That number is just taking the added damage of Heroic Strike. So if you go into a fight and you have no world buffs, your rotation is going to differ a lot than if you have world buffs. Because if you have enough rage, let's say you have unlimited rage and you're on Veil, you're going to be mashing that Heroic Strike every chance you get and filling every single global with Bloodthirst, Revenge, Sunder. As you can see here, Sunder is less rage or less threat than Heroic Strike. There are other aspects of Sunder that aren't quite factored into that. Sunder Armor can proc weapon proc. Sunder Armor can proc your Crusader. It can proc Wind Fury. Heroic Strike doesn't proc Wind Fury. I mean, outside of your normal auto attack, which would also proc Wind Fury. So there are benefits, and there's a big debate on whether you should use your rage on Sunder or Heroic Strike. But let's take it. I'm gonna link this to myself so I can pull it up. Here's the High Warlords. 59.5 DPS. This is a really good weapon for DPS. It's not a bad weapon for tanking either. Kind of slow though. I want to go to another weapon. All right, Pip Skinner. You have a 41.2 damage index versus a High Warlord's. Which one of these is the better tanking? It depends on the fight. For Veilstrauss, when you have unlimited rage and you can spam Heroic Strike without stopping at all. Pip Skinner. This dagger being 1.3 speed, even though it's only doing 37 to 70 damage on it, is a higher threat generating weapon than the rank 14 app on Veilstrauss, where you have unlimited rage. And that's because you are just spamming Heroic Strike the entire time. So, I mean, that fight's an exception to all of the rules. And we will get into gearing a little bit too. But for right now, that's just something that I want you to keep in mind with gear is it doesn't really matter how good you think something is unless you've done the research on why it's good. 2.9 speed weapon for tanking, even though that thing hits like a truck, you're just not going to get out enough Heroic Strike. I'm getting out over 2 Heroic Strikes with this Pip Skinner for every one that the High Warlord's cleaver. There are a lot of other 1.3 speed daggers. There's the Julie's dagger. I think that's 1.4. Alcor Sunraiser. But I get asked the question so many times. Hey, which piece should I use? This piece or this piece? And That is a totally loaded question because it's not the same. Like, depends on the fight, depends on where you're tanking, depends on a lot of. But anyways, before we get too deep into the gear options, I wanted to talk about the rest of the fundamentals of tanking. So to recap, um, threat, you generate it anytime you're in combat, even just generating. Healers generate it also. Your spells and abilities that you're going to use to get rage, or that you're going to spend rage on to generate threat, are going to be in order: Bloodthirst, Revenge, and Sunder. And then you're going to use Heroic Strike to dump whatever extra rage you have into it. And yeah, we can debate that later on if you want to. Again, I'm just trying to get fundamentals down. The last fundamental that I thought was super important is, as the tank, you need to have knowledge of the bot. You need to know exactly what their mechanics are. So, have you ever been into a Blackwing Lair raid and on, let's say, one of the dragons, the tank pulls or hunter pulls, whoever, and the tank just gets one shot right off the bat? A lot of people don't know this because you don't need to know this mechanic as a DPS. Okay, Thrash works kind of like what it says. It gives Firemaw 2 extra attacks. Quick Succession is a severe understatement. It's instant. Thrash will instantly hit your tank with 2 extra. The thing about Thrash that they didn't say on here is that Thrash can stack up. So Firemaw, depending on how far away he's pulled, he might have 2 or 3 stacks of Thrash, which means that he's going to hit your tank 4 or 6 times instantly. That's why tanks die on Dragon. Firemaw, Ebonrock, Flamegore. Thrash is a mechanic that you never needed to know about DPS, but it probably just happened and you don't know, and you just assume the tank was bad. When I see a tank pulling Firemaw, Ebonrock, or Flamegore without a shield on, I am expecting him to get shot. There are some ways around. Typically, if you have a hunter pull, you can Blood Rage, and you might get threat off the Blood Rage. You might get threat off casting a Battle Shout. That's another trick I'll go into another night. As far as pulling with the raid, you can put the hunter in your group and stand next to the hunter. If he pulls with his pet and you Battle Shout the hunter, you'll get threat from the bot. Not always a good thing. Not always what you want to do. So the safest way to pull Firemaw or Flamegore or Ebonrock is you let the pet eat the Thrash. If the pet eats the Thrash and dies, then you don't have to worry about it. But anyway, on the pull, you're Blood Raged and you're hitting shield block, so that shield blocks up when Firemaw gets to you. That's the most important thing, so that you won't get one shot, hopefully. Even with shield block up, been some times that I've been one shot because he had 3 stacks of Thrash on him. The hunter pulled it from too far away, and he had all that time to get Thrash stacks. And we can dive into specific encounters later. People have questions about it, but my point being, there are mechanics that you need to know about as a tank that you never needed to know about as a D. It was completely irrelevant. Even the wing buffet on Fire as a DPS, it doesn't really matter. You don't really, unless something goes wrong with the tank, it's irrelevant. But as a tank, if you go into that fight and you don't know what the wing buffet does, you're getting knocked back into ads, and then Firemaw is turning towards whatever warlock or mage or hunter is in the back of the raid and shadow flaming the entire raid, and that's a wipe, and you look like a noob. Not trying to scare people, but knowing the mechanics of the boss is fundamental to being successful. Because going into that fight, you know what a wing buffet does. You set up another tank to taunt it off. You guys know how it is. We've done this enough now. We know how the fight's supposed to go because of learning the hard way on what happens if you don't know the mechanics. You got to be as prepared as possible as a tank to set a raid up for. All right, moving on. All right, next I wanted to go over some macro. Nope. All right, so I know some people don't like using macros as a tank. I feel like it's super important. Whether you're a DPS, even as a DPS, it's important to have your tanking macros dialed in. So I DPS the raid. If you want to call it DPS, I got carried last night. There are a few times in Molten Core though, where someone would lose aggro, and I would see a giant running towards the rain, or if we accidentally pull too many mobs and those mobs are running through, and I'm over here in Zerker stance hitting this, and a mob runs by me, I've got a macro set up for my taunt. Well, taunt, you have to be in defensive. So make a macro so that you swap to defensive stance and taunt. And then you can save the raid in one button. Same deal with your shield block. Shield block, you got to be in defensive stance. You got to have a shield on. So if you're in Berserker stance with 2 weapons on right now, DPSing the boss, and you pull threat, your oh shit button is hit shield block, and you got a shield on, you go defensive stance with the shield on, hit it again, and you put shield block, and you can crush them. That is a macro that is mandatory to have, whether you're the main tank or an off tank. It's just too good to not have to just instantly, boom, shield on, not going to get crushed. It's going to save your life. If you noticed, I mean, I'll link these macros somewhere. So this shield block macro, if you have heroic strike queued while you press this macro, then it won't do it. It won't put on your shield. It's super confusing, but that's why I add the stop in there. So all you got to do is press it. But anyway, same deal with shield.
Does that work for any weapon swap or anything? Like if you have a heroic strike queued,
Yes,
it'll cancel.
I believe so. I believe it will not work if your heroic strike is at least. Yeah, actually, I mean, I can't say with certainty, but I'm 95% that's the way that it. Same deal with shield wall. Gotta add that one. It's just stopcast. Any sort of equipment macro. My guess is that most of the warriors in the guild don't have a shield wall macro where they equip a shield, go defensive stance, and cast shield wall. I mean, if you're not doing that in the macro, then you're pressing at least 3 buttons. Shield wall being your oh shit button. You don't have time to press 3 buttons to get that damage. 75% less damage reduction for 10 seconds could save the raid. Needs to be in 1 button. There's some other ones too. those are the main ones. Mocking Blow, same deal. Mocking Blow, you got to be in battle. Mocking Blow macro. It's on your. There it is. You got to be in battle stance to do Mocking Blow. Okay, so you're tanking Fire Maw, or you're off tanking Fire Maw, and your taunt fails on the Wing Buffet. Wing Buffet's being cast. Your taunt fails at 3 seconds. What do? You hit your button to go idle stance and Mocking Blow. And again, that otherwise it's 2 buttons. Make it into 1 button. You're going to be way quicker. Challenging Shout's a little different. You can cast Challenging Shout in any stance. The one thing I would recommend for Challenging Shout, especially if you're DPSing, is that you make a macro for this anyways, and you put to use a Lip limited invulnerability potion lasts 6 seconds, and Challenging Shout. Like we previously discussed, Challenging Shout does not move you to the top of the threat meter. It forces the target to attack you for 6 seconds. So when your Lip runs out, your Challenging Shout runs out. And then it's the next warrior's problem. Some of the most successful raids that I've been in is when all of the off tanks, the main tank, off tanks, and DPS warriors have Challenging Shout bound with Lip. Because honestly, you're running, say you're running 8 warriors in your raid group, 48 seconds worth of AoE tanking that you have every 10 minutes, which is insane. So especially for AQ, all the little bugs that pop out. I don't know if you've ever tried AoE taunting those. The ones after Scarum, before Bug Trio, when you kill the mobs and all the little ones come out. I don't know if you've ever tried AoE taunting those without having a Lip up. It doesn't work out very well. So macro those together. Having consumables, super important as a tank, especially if you're a threat tank. You're going to be using all this stuff to try to not throttle your DPS. I mean, that should be your goal. What, like, one of your biggest goals as a tank, and what I found the most enjoyment in playing this role is I'd ask my DPS warriors, "Hey, did you have to throttle at all? Did you have to throttle your DPS back?" Yeah, I had to throttle a little, but or yeah, I had to throttle a lot. I mean, that's one of the measuring sticks that I use for my role as a. My attitude towards it is, I want my bros to have the most fun that they can have out here, and I know they have fun pumping big numbers. So, for me, that's my personal attitude. And the more threat that I can put out, the more damage they can, the more fun they can have. I want to play this game to make it more fun for everyone. This is actually a swing timer. I know it's kind of hard to see right now. Show you. Got a big bear that I'm going to stab with this weak dagger. So that's a swing timer add-on. Not a weak aura. It turns yellow when I have Heroic Strike queued. I'm actually playing my Heroic Strike cast to get offhand. Well, that's super advanced. We'll talk about that later. If I have Cleave, it turns green. It doesn't have to be this one. You've got to have some sort of weapon timer so that you know when your swings are going through, when you have Hero Strike queued up, so that you know when that rage is going away. It helps you gauge how quick your rage is going to be emptying. This is a Lip and Challenging Shout. A weak aura, it'll show you if other warriors in the group are using a Lip and or Challenging Shout, so that you know if you need to use yours right after them. The most important, there are some cool weak auras that announce tank stuff. Like, it'll announce if my Bloodthirst is dodged or parried in the first 3 seconds of the fight, or Sunder, any ability that's dodged or parried in the first 3 seconds of the fight, it'll pop up. So, anyways, moving on. if you have 440 defense, you can't be crit by a mob. That's an insane amount of defense. That's like old school vanilla sword and board. Like that was the number that every tank aimed for, was 440 defense so that you can be crit. Otherwise, bosses have baseline. I think it's just 5%. I could be wrong about that. 5% chance, which does 1.5 times. That's a lot of damage, and that could kill you. And the meta of the game right now is if you get crit, it's not that big. It's just one attack. If you're going to die to a boss, it's going to be a combination of things, not just one crit. It could be a crushing blow. It could be parry haste. So to go over that real quick, crushing blows. I haven't even looked this up at the time, but how crushing blow happens if your avoidance isn't over a certain amount. Which, if you don't have a shield on with shield block up as a warrior, you have a chance to be. I forget. I think that does. It's either a 1.5 or double damage. So, I mean, quickly as in the Fury prop meta, things can spiral out of control if you get crit and crush at the same time, or one after the other. That's when you take big attacks. Like if you notice that your health is going down consistently and all of a sudden it goes down super quick, you will probably just crit, crush, or there's parry hit. That's the last. That's the tank buster. And basically, anytime the boss parries an attack, it attacks you and resets his swing time. It's like a Wind Fury proc form. So those are the three kind of, every boss can do that tank buster ability: crit, crush, or parry haste. Parry haste is often the most deadly. If you got a rogue that's not paying attention, or a warrior, and you're dual wield tanking, and let's say a warrior, an extra warrior and rogue are in front of the boss hitting it. So you got 6 weapons going at this boss, and he's just parrying the shit out of these guys, and he's getting an instant attack with every single parry. But anyways, let me go over gear, because everyone's always asking me, should I use this piece or should I use? There are a lot of things that it depends on. Are you the main tank? Are you the primary off tank? And in that primary off tank role, does your threat matter? Or are you just tanking one ad off to the side and the raid's ignoring it and you're just killing them both? So like last night, for example, okay, I got my edgies here, courtesy of Fury. These are great gloves. Best gloves in the game. Debatable with Gauntlets of Annihilation. Best threat gloves. Last night, I'm tanking one of the dogs on Golem. My threat doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I have any threat gear on at all. Like, I don't even need 6% hit. I think I was running 1%. But in that situation where I'm the third off tank, there's no reason for me to be wearing edge mask. My threat doesn't matter. Put on something with more defense, more stamina, more avoidance. Help the healers out. Like, I'll see tanks that are off tanking an ad that were killing third or fourth in a raid, and they're dual wielding in threat gear. That's not doing anything. Like, your DPS in defensive stance in tank gear, even if it's threat gear, it's garbage. That's not your role. Your role isn't to be the threat. And unless, if you're the main tank or the primary off tank, yeah, you're a threat tank. That's completely different than I'm tanking an add-on Gar or whatever. More often than not in this game, you're going to want stamina and defense and avoidance. Unless, like I said, unless you're the main tank or the primary off tank, threat gear most of the time doesn't. Um, even on patchwork, it doesn't. You're wearing as heavy of gear as you can get. Depends on the boss and depends what you're doing. What's your role in that? That's the question you gotta. Uh, and I'm more than happy to dive into a case by case basis. If you're saying, or if you come to me and you say, "Hey, this raid's coming up. I want a tank. Can you help me go over with gear options?" Yeah, absolutely. But I'm gonna ask you this question: What number tank are you? What bosses are you tanking on? And then we can dive into what your gear looks like. My gear right now, I mean, I'm aiming to have a threat set, but like picked up these BOEs on the auction house because I knew that more often than not, especially early on in the life of your character, you're not going to be main tank. You're not going to be off tank. Maybe your gear is good enough to do that, but that's not like if you're just getting your feet wet, then you're just going to tank ads. If you're going to get your feet wet, then practice saving the when an ad goes wild and you're DPSing and boom, you hit it with a taunt with your one button taunt max. Uh, that's how you get your feet wet. The attitude that you got to have though is you gotta have the want to be the hero. Like it's so easy to just ignore the mob that's running by the healer, but you making that play is going to save someone else's life, and you have a much better chance of surviving than they do. So, like for me, as a warrior, raid leader, tank, like that's what I look for in DPS. Like, who is going to step up to the plate to save the raid? Because yeah, stuff always goes wrong. Knowing how to adjust to that, uh, that that's invaluable. So, I think that's all I want to cover tonight. Yeah, I'm gonna end it here. I'll do some 5-man content next time and maybe some raid content